Latvijas Pen podkāsts Obligātā literatūra. Šajā raidieraksta Obligātā literatūra sērijā dzirdēsiet interviju ar Annu Julian Mendlik, kvīru dzejniekan, kas piedalījās šā gada dzejas festivālā Pagebreak. Dzirdēsiet arī tenan dzejoļus. Tenan ir dzimuma neitrāls vietniekvārds, kuru literatūrā tulkojot romānu 4. spārns ir ieviesusi Ieva Melngalve. Liels paldies viņai par to. Mums tagad tikai atliek to lietot, cienot nebināru cilvēku un autoru tiesības un vajadzības. Anna Julian Mendlik ir autora, kas dzīvo un strādā Berlīnē, raksta dzeju, esejus un nodarbojas ar tulkošanu. Viņas jaunākais dzejoļu krājums ir Dante in Dark Room, kas iznāca šogad 2026. gadā. Anna Julian Mendlik ir organizējusi festivālu Coming Out, Inviting In Berlīnē, kas bija veltīts tieši kvīru literatūrai un kultūrai. Par šo festivālu Anna Julian Mendlik runās arī intervijā, kuru dzirdēsiet šajā sērijā. Kvīru autori Anna Julian Mendlik intervēja Elīna Kokareviča. Bet vispirms sērijā dzirdēsiet Annu Julian Mendlik dzejoļus, kurus atdzejojusi Inga Gaile. Anna Julian Mendlik. Flanēzes. Mums nav iespēja apstāties zem katras laternas, kā duāno mīlniekiem, un tad vienkārši turpināt ceļu. It kā mēs vienmēr mūžīgi mūžos būtu bijuši daļa no ainavas. Vienmēr kāds mums aiz muguras sauc: lesbes, lesbietes, galvā pistās. Gribētu doties atklāti alejās, nemaskējoties augstpapēžu kurpēs, cepurēs, rozā bomberu jakās, svārkos vai liela izmēra kreklos, bokseru šortos. Kurš gan to zina, cik laiki vēl aizplūdīs, līdz mēs varēsim vienkārši mierīgi pastaigāties. Anatomija. Tu mana mūķene pērles virpinošā akģuna, tu taču ar to nedomāji rožu kroni, vai tomēr? Varbūt domāji vilnaino rozi kā Anne Sekstona. Vilnainā roze, kas atklāja savas ieloces, krokas, pūkainītis, nejaunu austere, kas gliemežnīcā auklē pērli ar trulu asmeni, tiek uzlausta, lai izsūktu to kopā ar citronu sulu. Tā nav arī gliemezīte sāliņā, lai gan, protams, visticamāk hermafrodīts, kaut kas salds, tomēr nepiebriedusi plūme. Tā nav pāršķēlies kasteņu kažociņš ar adatām vai iešķelts naks. Nē, nekas no tā visa tā nav. Asociācija. Es pārinterpretētu Ginsberga ainavu. Rakstītu: es sniedzos pēc viņas marmora vulvas. Man nāktu smiekli, nevarētu nedomāt par Diānu, kas atvelk loku, balansējot uz vienas kājas pirkstgaliem, atšāvu skailo dibenu, sporta zāļu un piesvīdušo paklāju priekštec. Marmors piestāv cietākiem locekļiem. Ar akmens miesu nepietiek Diānai, prātoju. Un redzu smiltis, kuras ezers laiza, kad tajās iegremdēju savus pirkstus. Lesbiski dzejoļi. Cik lesbiski ir tavi dzejoļi? Jautāja kāds. Es nezinu, es domāju, kādi tie ir un ko tie dara, kad es uz tiem neskatos. Tas neko nelīdz, ja sāku tos novērot. Nekas netop skaidrāks, jo dzejoļi ir ļoti kautrīgi. Tie līdzinās mājas gariem. Tikai tie neuzkopja, jo dzejoļi ir ļoti haotiski, un viņi nevienam neatstāja dāvaniņas kurpēs, jo par kādu naudu, lai viņi gan tās pirktu. Iespējams, ka mani dzejoļi mīl vārdus ar O, lūkojas astoņkājos caur ovālu logu zem ūdens, vai olbaltās krūtīs pušapos ar saplacinātiem krūšu galiem. Ja mani dzejoļi paši rakstītos, tie vislabāk rakstītos noteikti onomapoētikā. Totoro lolotu un bieži nokļūtu Tokijā, ar Yoko Ono dziesmām kūkotu, ovālām acīm, doķenes bolītos par bonobo, mērktu dūres Orinoko straumē un jodelētu Bosforu krastos, skūpstītos ļoti postmoderni uz robustiem, ironiskiem, rokoko, rozīgiem, vienkārši plikiem, tomātu dibeniem, līdz beidzot pat pēdējais homo sapiens zaudētu ilūziju par dzejas nevainīgo dabu. Mākslinieces kā monstra portrets. Man nav zvīņu un liesmojošas ādas, man nav pūstošu zobu un pūžņojošu iekaisumu, man nav čūskas matu, nav nagu, kurus iedurt sarunu šova dalībnieku ausīs. Mani neviens vēl nav redzējis ar apdegušu muguru un arī ne ar hula hupa apli. Man nav indas pūdelīšu pie jostas, nav suņa kāju, kad naktī eju uz veikalu, es jau iepriekš zinu, ko es pirkšu. Ja es būtu māte, tāpat kā pārējie, algoritms ir mana DNS siltumnīca. Es metu akmentiņus mašīnas ķēdē, tuvojas zilganas sirēnas, ne jau lai izgaismotu vai dzenātu ātrumu pārkāpējus, viņi mani aizved uz karjeru un iemāca man savu dziesmu. Atrodi mūsu, atrodi pat pazemes šahtās. Man nav vajadzīga zivs aste vai melnas ķepas. Man pietiek ar tavu vārdu. Acu skatienu, kad tu uz mani paskaties un redzi monstru, sastingu. Glīta kā bučs. Tu nekad neesi rakstījusi ar mātes pienu, varbūt kaut kad ar asinīm, bet slepus. Bučs nāk no bučera, miesa nāk no miesnieka, tu saki. Ne tādēļ, ka esi augstasinīga, bet tādēļ, ka katra tavas mīļotās ķermeņa daļa ir pelnījusi īpašu attieksmi. Izšķidā katru tēlu dzejā. Vai tas ir precīzs? Vai tas ir asprātīgs? Kā bruņas es sašutus saucu. Dzejoļi nav kaujas cirvi. Tu piemiedz man ar aci, domājot par divasmeņu cirvi. Padomā, cik romantisks ir auseklīts. Lūdzu. Nemaz nav romantisks, es saucu, bet gribu visu, kas nāk gaismā zem tava bruņojuma. Cik brīvi sēž mana ķivere, manas bruņas. My harness, my mask. Slepenā valoda. Kurā no aktiem mūsu ķermeņi kļūst pornogrāfiski? Un vai tie tādi ir, ja neviens mūs neredz? Un neieraksta neviens mūsu morzes kodus, šīs skaņas? Noņems savu skropstu man nav vaiga, uzlaiz to no mana pirksta gala, tā paliek pie manas mēles gala norīto un saki, kā tā garšo. Tu nēsā savu apakšveļu uz degunu, lai gan tā ir pievilgusi smaga no smaržas, tu to devē par relikviju, atlikumu no manas iepriekšējās dzīves. Mūsu kaislība, tās kols nav ne binārs, ne netīrs, ne zinātniskā fantastika, nav neiespējams fanfiction uz mūsu ceļiem, un kā tā liek uzmirdzēt skropstām, acis ir pilnībā mitras. Bēbīši daiki, kā izslāpuši vampīri. Mēs tuvojamies pazemes slēptuvē. Paliek vieni aiz muguras dūdojoši baznīcu torņi, mūsu āda apdeg, esam dienas bailīgas, mēs košļājam vienu otru, attīram dvēseles. Asins garša mums nav sveša, un jau rezervēta vieta mums aizsaulē, no iekšpuses aizzīmogojam savu zārku pret pasaules skumjām un griežamies kapā. Ar uguns mēlēm paliekam izsalkušas, mēs abas zīdītāji gultā, čuksti iedala lomas spēlē, kurai caurdzurta sirdi un kura zaudēs galvu. Jautājumi, cik bieži vēl mūsu augšām celšanās no mirušajiem, visus satrauks uz trokšņēnu pusnakts misi, ar bailēm, nevis ar aleluja. Eņģeļi. Mīlīgi ķerubi nopurinās no mākoņiem, kā tikko svaigi no placentas, pūkaini kupidoni spalvojas lejup. Tas, kā viņi nes savus mazos peņus, katedrālēs kā procesijā, neko nenozīmē. Tas patiešām vēl neko nenozīmē, ja viņi mētātu savas matu cirtas, plakšķinātu skropstotās acis, elfu krūtis, varbūt pat silikonu. Nevienā no ciematu daudzajām baznīcām man nav izdevies satikt eņģeli ar maksti. neskaties zem ādas apmalojuma. Ko gan es varu jautāt starp šiem ķermeņiem no koka, marmora, granīta dziedošiem kanonā? Ļaujiet mums pašiem runāt. Zvaigznīte šur, zvaigznīte tur. Bučiņas, bučiņas. Baba Jaga. Mežā tu pieliekusies slauki mūsu atkritumus kaudzē. Tavas zobu protēzes peld kokteilī pie baseina. Baba, babuška, babucīte. Atver automatizētos būdas logus, ar viedo klikšķi 5 stikla acis, izslīd vistas kājas un nesās skriet. Baba, babuška, babucīte. Iejauc mums mūsu ikdienišķo aspirīna devu, no vītola ieejauc no vītola, kas skumjās noslīkst pār strautu, palīdz mums ar nedzīvo bērnu, baba, babuška, babucīte. Naktī zem sēgas tu spēlējies ar savu stūri un lido uz stobra, lido tik augstu, baba, babuška, babucīte, tu vecā meža partizāna. Es gribu apgūt tavu mākslu, raķešu galviņas žāvējas pie žoga. Baba, babuška, babucīte.
Yeah, so thank you for meeting me, and for the warming purposes, the first question, I think it's easy, but let's see. How did you start writing poetry?
How did I start writing? I think it began at school, actually, where we had some exercises concerned with poetry, and then I realized that I really like reading it, and I started to read poetry for myself. And also started experimenting writing it. And then when I started my studies, I was lucky enough to meet a group of people who shared this interest of poetry. And I think that's very important also to exchange your views on writing. Yeah, and eventually that's how I got also to present poems publicly, and decided to do it in a more professional way.
Okay. Is it important to you that your poetry is immediately read as a queer text, or you can allow reader to interpret it?
Yeah, this question of how queer is my writing has been an interesting process for me, because it's also linked to the situation, I would say, of how queer writing or queer poetry has been or is perceived in your situation. And it's been only several years, I would say, that there has been a huge blossoming of queer poetry in Germany, as far as I have observed it. Of course, you have to mention that there always has been queer writing before, in one way or the other, but it hasn't had the visibility that it has now. My earlier writing, I would say, is a bit more, looking back, I would say it's a bit more closeted in a way. So I started to write queer poetry openly only a few years ago, and I'm interested about how it will evolve. But it's become a very important part of my writing.
Yeah. How do you feel as a queer person in Germany? And maybe if you have any feelings in Latvia as well, for a short time?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to say much about the situation in Latvia, because it's only for a few days, and also in the capital, Riga, it might be a different situation. But in Germany, I can only tell about my individual observations, because everybody else has their own experiences with this. But when I grew up, in the 90s, early 2000s, I would say that it wasn't so easy to be a queer person. There was a lot of homophobia in the surroundings, even if it was implicit or not meant in a bad way or so, it was very present. And what I perceive now is that, or I hope it, due to a larger visibility of the topic, people start to reflect more on what it means to meet a queer person or to be a queer person yourself. The situation is far from being positive, and there's a huge backlash. In Germany now we are dealing with a huge backlash politically, like in a major societal sense, a major political sense, but it concerns queer people very much as well.
I read your poems that Inga has translated for the festival page break, and also found this bits of information on internet that you have published a poetry collection on the queer desire, I would say so, yeah. The bodily expression and love, yeah, in this context. I would like to ask you, you are asking this question, how lesbian is poetry. How would you describe it yourself at the moment, this question?
Yeah, this question is one that I have been asked by someone like a few years ago, and I found it peculiar, but also a productive question. When I got the question, it was meant in the way like, is this a topic that I'm working on or that I'm interested in? This actually kicked off a lot of reflection for me, and that's when I openly started to write about queer desire, and also reflect about all the bodily aspects and identities, and I mixed it with my medical background, because I studied medicine before that, and I realized that it's very much connected also to these questions. So for my writing today, it's evolving, and I wouldn't want to label my poems so much, even though I think it's always this dilemma of, on the one side, it's somehow important to reflect from what angle you are writing, on the other side to actually find your own individual voice that is not necessarily linked to a group identity.
But when you say like label, you don't want to label your poetry, do you mean like labels inside queer poetry, like lesbian, gay, bisexual, I don't know, or you mean like queer versus like heteronormative labels?
I mean like more like queer labels, for example. I always think about bookstores. I don't know what the situation in Latvia is, but in Germany now we have quite a lot of bookstores that have this, queer bookshelf, and the advantage is that, people who are specifically looking for books on this topic will directly find books in the queer section and can get the information that they are looking for. But on the other hand, you would want it to be part of all the other books, right? So that's always this kind of dilemma, or yeah. I see it as part of an evolution towards a better situation, I would say.
Okay, so what do you think queer desire can give to like modern society, like people around us, and can we learn something from it?
Well, I think it's very important to acknowledge that queer desire is a part of humanity and society, and of how people feel and perceive themselves and perceive love. It doesn't necessarily have to give anything. I would say it needs a place where it can exist, that's for sure, and it needs a place that is safe to exist, and that's something that society, the whole of society, can give if the circumstances provide these conditions. I think what queer or talking openly or reflecting openly about queer desire can certainly give us, teach people to actually reflect on their own desires and to find out about their own desires, and to not be afraid, ideally, to show them. So I would think that there are many people who are closeted, who are afraid to talk about it, or who are not even aware of their true desires, so to say. And certainly films, movies, or books can raise this awareness in a way, because there are possibilities of identifications maybe with figures.
I just also like reading your poems and just thinking about so this question popped up: how much desire you write, this kind of desire you write, is related to love, or it is related to freedom?
To love or to freedom?
Yes. Or maybe it's both.
It would be interesting to ask how desire and love is connected. It certainly has some connecting parts, but I would say that it might be distinct also, to have desire for something or someone, to love someone. And the relation to freedom is certainly, the ideal of the utopia would be to be free to love and to desire in a way that is to feel close to yourself. I would want to add it without violating the boundaries of someone else. I think that's important to add. You're not free to violate the boundaries of someone else.
So the next question is about what do you think is the most lacking in today's depiction of queer love in art in general, not only in poetry or literature, but...
That's a difficult question. I'm happy to see that it gets more diversified, definitely, the depiction of love, also in different media, some mainstream media as well. But I would say that there is something in queerness that is, never complete in a way, or that's always in some way critical of the status quo, so to say. So there might always be things that we are missing, or we always have to keep this to stay questioning and to ask ourselves, what are we missing? What do we need to understand? I'm thinking of, for example, of polyamorous relationships. That's something I haven't seen so much of.
Yeah, you mentioned your poems, the body, the human body is described very directly, and also maybe sometimes provocatively, if it depends on the point of view. Why do you write in this way? It's a stupid question, but maybe it's some kind. I think about maybe it's some kind of the way how it can representation of the body can be like controlled by yourself, not by the gaze of other people.
Yeah, certainly. That now that you mentioned the gaze, it's partly due to reflection, which direction comes the gaze from. So, what perspective has the gaze, so to say, or is it? How can you maybe diversify it, or how do you have to reflect on the gaze in general? Certainly, these are questions. But one main point is also that my impression is that there has been some point, like German-speaking poetry, I would say, where the body had a bigger consideration. Or the question how to write about bodies and how to write about desires is something that came up more in the recent years, and it's a very challenging task, especially with all the historical baggage that the literature tradition has, or the canonical literature tradition has.
Do you think you are a political poet?
Well, at some point when I started writing, especially about queer topics, I realized the thing that love is political. So, and I write about love quite often. So, just by doing this, I say yes, I'm a political poet.
Great. Yeah. How can literature influence society's attitude towards marginalized groups of people?
Well, literature is primarily a good way to express yourself and your opinions, and ideally literature is a place that is very broad, that includes as many voices as possible, that is, thinks itself as a pluralistic platform, so to say, and that's already a very big contribution that literature can give. And also, in your own writing, you can, reflect on all those topics, of course, and that's, the second path or one other path. To always be aware of your own prejudices also in writing.
I wanted to ask one more question about the poems I read, and I noticed that you used the image of a monster in your poems, like or the outcast. For example, this Baba Yaga motif is in your poems. So I found that queer authors often use the image of the monster to describe their queerness and also the sense of the world impacted by it. And what does this image mean to you, and why do you use it?
Yeah, this image of a monster is in this specific poem is linked to the figure of Medusa. And that's pretty much about, the question of the gaze, because those who look at Medusa, the so-called monster, are turned into stone. But then again, when you look at the story of Medusa, you very much start questioning who is actually the monster here in this situation. And so I wanted I changed the gaze, so to say, and said, what if, it tells more about the person who is looking or who is gazing and sees a monster rather than about the person who is looked at. And I would say that is an observation that probably many queer people can or share, unfortunately. Yeah.
So you were one of the organizers of a festival inviting in and coming out. Can you tell more about this festival?
Yeah, so that's a festival that I organized together with a team of curators at LCB, which is called Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin, a place, a major German literature place, and which is nice. It's nice that they have a certain tradition, I would say, of dealing with queer topics like for 10 years now, and I'm very happy to having been part of this team like 2 years ago. And so we wanted to go deeper into this question: what is a coming out, and does it still apply as a concept? What is the history of it? And how do people deal with this concept in their writing, either in poetry or prose or performances? So
that sounds great. What's maybe you have some advice for those who are organizing similar festivals? That's what we should take into account when organizing something for LGBT plus community.
Well, it's always good to start somewhere and to have a place that supports a project. Ideally, also a fund that supports the project. what I found, like personally, what I found very important is to have, to work in a group rather than on your own when you do projects like this, or when you also want to be more public with your queer writing, because there's a saying that you're stronger together than alone.
Yeah, of course. So the last question is like I think the standard of the interviews. Can you tell us, the listeners, that your favorite poets or authors in general, and what would you recommend us to read?
No, that's a difficult question. So when I think of the poetry scene in Germany, for example, I can definitely recommend the writing of Odile Kennel, who also translates poems by Ricardo Domeneck, a Brazilian writer who's living in Germany. I absolutely recommend also the poetry of Mátyás Dunajcsik, the Hungarian poet who's living in Berlin, or Logan February, and also there's Rike Scheffler, and many, many more people I would have to think about, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think we covered a lot in a short time. Thank you for the interview.
Tikko dzirdējāt sarunu starp Annu Julian Mendliku un Elīnu Kokareviču. Šis bija Latvijas Pen raidieraksts Obligātā literatūra, kura veidojusi Elīna Kokareviča, Inga Gaile un Anete Valaine. Raidieraksta izveidošanu finansiāli atbalsta Valsts kultūra kapitāla fonds.